I remember the exact moment I fell in love with Sean Casey. It was a Tuesday. Unremarkable in every way a Tuesday can be. I was sitting in the back corner of a coffee shop called Milo's, the kind of place that smells like burnt espresso and ambition, where laptop screens glow like little campfires and everyone pretends they're not watching everyone else. I had a stack of papers in front of me, red pen in hand, doing absolutely nothing useful because the chapter one was supposed to be editing had stopped making sense 3 hours ago, and then the door opened. He walked in like he owned the air around him. That sounds dramatic, I know. Trust me, I was the first person to roll my eyes at myself when I caught my own reaction. I was 23 years old, a published author with 2 modestly successful novels under my belt and a reputation for being emotionally unavailable. I did not fall for men who walked through doors like they owned the place. I did not fall at all, as a general principle, but Sean Casey walked through that door and the principle dissolved. He was tall. Dark-haired. He had a jaw that looked like it had been carved by someone who took their work very seriously, and eyes the color of storm clouds right before everything breaks open. He was wearing a gray jacket over a plain white shirt, sleeves rolled up to his elbows in a way that suggested he'd started the day more formal and the day had won. He looked tired. He looked like a man carrying something heavy that he refused to put down. He sat 2 tables away from me. He ordered black coffee and a croissant he didn't eat. He opened a folder and stared at it the way I'd been staring at my manuscript. With the particular desperation of someone who needs the answer to be in there, somewhere, and is running out of places to look, I watched him for 11 minutes before I realized I was staring. I looked back at my papers. Then I looked back at him. Then I did something I had never done before in my entire carefully constructed life of emotional unavailability. I leaned over and said, "Whatever's in that folder, it's not going to get better if you keep looking at it like that." He looked up. Those storm cloud eyes landed on me and I felt it in my chest, a kind of pressure that was almost painful. "Excuse me," he said, "the folder. I've been watching you stare at it for 10 minutes and you look more destroyed every time. Either the answer's in there and you can't see it, or the answer isn't in there and you're trying to will it into existence." I paused. Neither approach is working. There was a beat of silence. Then, slowly, the corner of his mouth curved up. "Arthur Costa," I said, extending my hand across the gap between our tables. "Sean Casey." His hand was warm. His grip was firm without being aggressive. "Are you always this intrusive with strangers?" "Only the ones who are suffering loudly in public spaces," he laughed. It was a low, surprised sound, like he hadn't expected to and wasn't entirely sure how to handle it. I catalogued it immediately. Filed it away. The way people with writers' brains do, hoarding observations like their currency. That was how it started. We talked for 2 hours that first day. He was a structural engineer, working on a project that had hit a bureaucratic wall so thick and so wide that he wasn't sure he'd ever get to the other side of it. I was a novelist pretending to edit a manuscript that had gone off the rails somewhere around chapter 8. We were both, in our own ways, stuck, by the end of those 2 hours. I knew 3 things about Sean Casey. 1. He was the kind of person who listened with his whole body. When I spoke, he turned toward me. He didn't check his phone. He didn't let his eyes drift. He was just there, completely, in a way I had never experienced before and hadn't known I was missing. 2. He laughed reluctantly, like laughter was something he'd been trained to ration, but once you got it out of him it was the most genuine sound in any room. 3. I was in very serious trouble. We started meeting at Milo's every Tuesday. Then Tuesdays and Thursdays. Then whenever we could manage, which became most days. It happened gradually, the way important things often do. So that by the time I noticed what was happening I was already deep inside it. He walked me home one evening when the rain started unexpectedly. We stood under the awning of my building for 40 minutes talking instead of going inside. When he finally said goodnight, he touched my face once, briefly, just the back of his fingers against my jaw, and I stood in my apartment doorway for a long time after he left, hand pressed to the place he'd touched. Our first kiss happened on a bridge. Because of course it did. Because the universe has a flair for setting design that my editor would probably call excessive. It was an autumn evening, the sky doing that thing it does in autumn where it turns 17 shades of amber and gold and refuses to apologize for being beautiful. We were walking and talking, something about a book I'd recommended that he'd actually read, genuinely read, not just skimmed so he could seem interested. He'd had opinions about it. Strong ones. We were in the middle of a spirited disagreement about whether the protagonist had made the right choice in the final chapter when he stopped walking. I stopped too, a step ahead of him, and turned back. What? He was looking at me the way he looked at things he was trying to understand. Methodical. Careful. Like I was a structural problem he was calculating the load-bearing points of. I've been trying to figure out the right moment, he said. And I've realized I'm going to be waiting forever if I keep doing that. Right moment for what? He stepped forward. He was close enough that I could feel the warmth coming off him, that particular warmth that alphas carry like a constant low-level fire. May I? He asked quietly. I said yes before my brain had fully processed the question. He kissed me softly. Once. Then, when I didn't pull away, again, less softly. The city continued doing its city things all around us, indifferent to the fact that my carefully maintained emotional distance was crumbling like old concrete. When we pulled apart, he was watching me with an expression I couldn't fully read. You're going to be trouble, I told him. Probably, he agreed. He took my hand for the rest of the walk home. I let him. The next 6 months were, without exaggeration, the best of my life. I know how that sounds. I know the particular brand of sentimentality it carries and how it sits in the chest of someone hearing a story that they already know ends badly. But I'm not going to minimize it or soften it or dress it up in retrospective irony just to make it easier to swallow. Those 6 months were genuinely, irrevocably, beautifully good. Sean was not an easy person. I want to say that clearly so no one builds him into a saint. He was stubborn. He had a tendency to internalize things that should have been said out loud. He could be distant when he was stressed, pulling away like a tide. And he had a complicated relationship with vulnerability that made it difficult sometimes to know what he was actually feeling versus what he wanted you to think he was feeling. But he was also the person who remembered, 3 weeks after I mentioned it in passing, that my grandmother used to make a specific kind of almond cake for my birthday. He showed up on my birthday with one, badly made, clearly baked by someone who had never baked before and had consulted an uncertain number of internet sources. He was the person who read everything I ever wrote. Not to flatter me. He read it with the same careful, structural attention he gave to engineering plans, and then he told me honestly what wasn't working and why. And he was right often enough that I started showing him things before I showed my editor. He was the person who, when I was in the black cave of a second draft crisis and hadn't left my apartment in 3 days, showed up with food and didn't ask me to talk about it. He just sat at the other end of my couch, reading quietly, being present in the way that only people who have really understood you can be present. Not fixing. Just staying. I loved him. I had been falling since that Tuesday in Milo's, and by the 6-month mark I had completed the fall and was standing on the ground of it, looking up at what I'd fallen from, knowing with absolute certainty that there was no climbing back. I told him on a Sunday morning. We were in bed, the specific gray softness of a morning with no obligations, and I'd been awake for a while watching him sleep. He opened his eyes and caught me watching. That's creepy, he said, voice thick with sleep. I love you, I said. The sleep cleared from his eyes. He looked at me for a moment. Then he reached out and pulled me closer and pressed his mouth to my hair. I love you too, he said. I've been trying to figure out how to say it for 3 weeks. You could have just said it. I was waiting for the right moment. Sean, I know. The complications began, as complications often do, quietly and without announcing themselves. I found out I was pregnant on a Wednesday morning in February. I was sitting on the bathroom floor, back against the tub, looking at 2 parallel lines on a test I had taken mostly to rule out the possibility. The lines were very clear. They did not suggest ambiguity. They said what they meant. My first emotion, if I'm being honest, was not what you might expect. It was wonder. There was something growing inside me that was partly me and partly Sean, and that fact, in that cold bathroom on that Wednesday morning, struck me as extraordinary. Not terrifying. Not catastrophic. Extraordinary. I called my doctor. I made an appointment. I sat with the information for 1 day, 2 days, 3, letting myself feel the weight and the wonder of it before I had to start figuring out what came next. What came next was telling Sean. I told him on a Friday evening. We were at his apartment, after dinner, and I waited until we were on his couch, comfortable, close. I had thought about how to say it. I had rehearsed several versions. In the end, I just said it, I'm pregnant. The silence that followed was not what I expected. I had prepared for surprise. I had prepared for a moment of stunned recalibration before he came back to me. I had even prepared, in the darkest corner of my preparation, for mixed feelings, for the complicated terrain of someone who wasn't expecting this and needed a moment to navigate. What I had not prepared for was the specific quality of that silence. It was cold. It was removed. It had a distance in it that I had never felt from him before and which landed against my chest like a physical impact. How long have you known? He asked. 3 days, and you waited 3 days to tell me. I need time too. He said it quietly. Without anger, which somehow made it worse. He said it like a door closing. Sean, I need to think. He stood up. I'm not saying anything right now that I might not mean. I need time to think. I looked up at him from the couch. I tried to read his face the way I always read his face and found that whatever was happening behind it was locked in a room I didn't have the key to. Okay, I said. Take the time you need, he nodded. He walked me to the door. He kissed me once, briefly, on the forehead. It felt like punctuation. The wrong kind, he called the next day. And the day after that. The conversations were brief and careful and felt like walking on glass. He was present but not close. There, but retreated to some internal distance I couldn't close. On the 10th day, he came to my apartment. I knew as soon as I opened the door. There is a particular look on someone's face when they have made a decision they know is going to hurt you and have been steeling themselves for it. I had written that face on characters before, from the outside, as an observer. I had never had it aimed at me. I stepped back. I let him in. I sat on the couch and he sat in a chair across from me, not beside me, and I thought, he has placed furniture between us because he thinks it will make this easier. It won't, I can't do this, he said. I didn't say anything. I know how that sounds. I know what he stopped. His jaw was tight. This wasn't something I planned for. A family. I've spent a long time being very clear with myself about what my life would look like, and this isn't. You could have told me that, I said. My voice was steady. I was very proud of my voice for being steady. At any point in the past year, you could have told me that a family wasn't something you wanted. I know, I would have. I stopped. I wasn't sure, actually, what I would have done. I wasn't sure the knowing would have changed anything, given how deep I was already in by the time this conversation became possible. But I deserved the information. I deserved the choice. I'm sorry, he said. Are you, Arthur? Because sorry is a word people say when they've done something they feel bad about. And the thing you're doing right now is a choice. You can feel bad about a choice and still make it. Both things can be true. I know. Don't do that. Do what? Keep agreeing with me. It feels like, I stopped. Like you're waiting for me to exhaust myself so you can leave. Are you saying you want me to not have? No. His voice was sharp. No. That is entirely your decision and I would never. Good. I held his gaze. Because I'm keeping them, the word landed between us. He heard it too. Them. Plural. Something in his expression shifted, something complicated that I didn't have time to fully read before he locked it away again. You know it's more than one? He asked quietly. The doctor thinks so. We'll know more at the first official scan, but the initial tests suggest twins. His face did something then that I have thought about many times since. It wasn't the reaction of a man who felt nothing. It was the reaction of a man who felt too much and was running from it, which is a different thing entirely, though it produces very similar outcomes. He stood up. I need you to understand, he said, that I am not equipped for this. That this is not something I can. You keep telling me what you can't do, I said. You're not telling me why. He stopped. He looked at me. For a moment the wall came down and I saw something real, something cracked and frightened and deeply ashamed, and then it went back up. I'm sorry, he said again, and then he left. I sat on my couch for a long time after the door closed. I didn't cry immediately. I sat very still, the way you sit when you're waiting to understand the full shape of what's just happened. The apartment was quiet in the specific, ringing way apartments are quiet after someone has left who should have stayed. When I did cry, it was not gentle. It was the kind of crying that comes from somewhere structural. From the load-bearing parts of yourself, and it left me exhausted and wrung out, and somehow, underneath all of it, still certain, I was keeping them, I was going to be okay. I said both things out loud to my empty apartment, because saying things out loud makes them more real, and I needed them to be real right then. I will not pretend that being pregnant and alone was romantic or empowering in the way that certain kinds of stories make it seem. It was hard. It was lonely in ways that were specific and physical, a loneliness that lived in the gaps where another person should have been. There were doctor's appointments where I sat in chairs meant for two people and took up only one. There were nights at 4 in the morning when the twins were both moving and I couldn't sleep, and there was nobody to press a hand to my side and share the wonder of it. There were moments of fear, sharp and cold, when I would think about what came next and feel the weight of it settling entirely onto my own shoulders. My mother came to stay for a month. She was practical and fierce and did not say anything unkind about Sean, which I appreciated, though I could see the effort it cost her. My friend Della, who had been my closest friend since university, showed up on alternating weekends with food and opinions and the specific gift of treating my situation as ordinary when I needed it to feel ordinary. I finished my novel. I know. People find this remarkable when I mention it. I finished it 6 weeks before my due date, sent it to my editor with a note explaining the circumstances, and she sent back a message that said only, "Arthur, this is the best thing you've ever written." I cried about that too. I think being stripped down to something very essential by grief and fear and love all at once does something to writing. I think it makes it honest in a way that comfort doesn't. I am not recommending the experience as a creative methodology. I'm just noting what happened. The twins were born on a Thursday in October, Oliver first. Then Eli, 6 minutes later, as though he'd needed a moment to decide. They put Oliver in my arms and I looked at him and felt something happen in my chest that I can only describe as a kind of reorganization. Like the furniture of yourself being moved to accommodate something new and essential that was always supposed to be there. Then Eli, smaller and louder, with a furious expression that suggested he had not agreed to the terms of his arrival. I held them both and I thought of Sean, because of course I did. I thought of his storm cloud eyes and his reluctant laugh and the way he read with his whole body, and I thought, these two small humans have those eyes. They have that jaw. They are carrying half of a person who chose to be absent, and the grief of that is real and sharp, and it is also somehow not the loudest thing in the room. The loudest thing in the room was them. Oliver and Eli Costa. My sons. The first year was the hardest. I have been told this is always true and I believe it, though I suspect the first year of twin parenthood has specific difficulties that regular first-year parents are not fully exposed to. There was a period of approximately 3 months where I slept in fragments of 90 minutes or less and lost the ability to form complex sentences. My editor called during this period to discuss cover options and I apparently responded at length to questions that hadn't been asked while falling asleep mid-sentence. She was very understanding. She also started emailing instead of calling. I had help. I want to be clear about that. My mother extended her visit. Della was there more than she wasn't. I hired a part-time helper when the advance from the new book came through, and the difference it made to my sanity was the difference between standing and drowning, but I was the one who was there at 4 in the morning when they both cried at once. I was the one who learned the difference between Oliver's hungry cry and his uncomfortable cry and his "I simply object to the situation" cry. I was the one who sat in the rocker in their room at 3 in the morning, one of them in each arm, too tired to think about anything except the weight of them and the warmth and the smallness of their hands. And I was the one who fell so deeply in love with them that the fear and the exhaustion became secondary. Not absent. Secondary. Oliver was curious about everything. Before he could walk, he observed. He tracked movement with those storm cloud eyes, cataloging the world with a seriousness that made adults around him laugh, this tiny person treating a ceiling fan with the focused attention of a scientist examining a specimen. When he started walking, he walked toward things. Always toward. He wanted to touch and understand and be closer to whatever interested him. Eli was different. Eli was noise and movement, a small person who seemed to generate more energy than physics should have allowed. Who laughed at everything, including his own laughter, who had strong and frequently expressed opinions about the acceptable conditions of his existence. He was fierce and warm and flung himself at the world with an enthusiasm that I found exhausting and magnificent in equal measure. They were different from each other in the way that twins sometimes are, distinct right down to some fundamental layer, and loving them was two different experiences that somehow occupied the same enormous space. I wrote through it. When they slept, when they were with my mother or Della or the helper, I wrote. It was the thing that kept me connected to something that was mine, distinctly and personally mine. In the midst of an existence that had become largely about meeting the needs of two very small people. My third novel came out when they were 8 months old and sold better than the first two combined. My fourth was already taking shape by the time they turned 1. I didn't think about Sean constantly. I want to be clear about that, because stories like this one can suggest a particular kind of sustained longing that is more cinematic than honest. There were weeks at a time where the demands of my life were so complete that he simply wasn't in the foreground. But he was there, somewhere. In the shape of my sons' faces. In the specific quality of certain silences. In the occasional night when the loneliness wasn't general but pointed. Aimed at something specific, the space where a particular person should have been, I did not reach out to him. He had made his choice. I respected it, even though it had broken something in me, because choices mean more when they cost something, and his choice had cost him his sons. That seemed like its own punishment, and I did not want to take it from him. If you are still watching, subscribe so you never miss a story like this. Now let's see what happens next. He showed up on a Saturday. Oliver and Eli had just turned 2. We had survived a birthday party that involved a significant quantity of cake, 2 extremely determined toddlers, my mother, Della, and Della's husband Marco. And a balloon incident that I have agreed with Della to never fully describe in any written or spoken medium. The apartment was in the specific state of aftermath. I was in the kitchen doing dishes in my most unflattering clothing, because sometimes after a day like that the only appropriate response is your oldest sweater and the dishes that nobody else does. The doorbell rang. I shouted, "Della, if you forgot something it can wait until tomorrow," because Della had the habit of circling back. The doorbell rang again. I dried my hands. I went to the door. I opened it. The first thing I registered was that he was different. Not enormously. Not the difference of years transforming someone into a stranger. He was recognizably Sean Casey, still tall, still that jaw, still the storm cloud eyes. But there was something changed in the set of him, something quieter and less armored, as though whatever had been holding him rigid at the center had shifted. He was looking at me with an expression that I had no reference point for, because I had never seen it on his face before. "Arthur," he said. I stood in my doorway in my old sweater with dish soap on my hands, and I looked at Sean Casey and I felt 18 different things simultaneously. "You need to explain yourself before you take another step," I said. "I know, I'm serious. I need you to explain what you are doing here before I decide whether to close this door." "I know." He held my gaze. "May I come in?" I thought about it. Genuinely thought about it, standing there in the wreckage of a birthday party, with my sons asleep in the next room and 2 years of managed survival behind me. I thought about what saying yes would mean and what saying no would mean, and what I owed myself and what, if anything, I owed him. I stepped back. I let him in. He stood in my living room and looked around at the evidence of a life I'd built without him. The low shelves crowded with board books and soft toys. The photograph on the wall, Oliver and Eli at 6 months, those wide storm cloud eyes looking at the camera with identical expressions of profound evaluation. The twin stroller folded by the door. The small pair of shoes beside it, 2 pairs, absurdly small. He looked at the shoes for a long time. "Tell me," I said. I sat on the couch. I didn't offer him a seat. From the beginning. Why? He sat anyway. Not beside me. In the chair. The same chair he'd sat in 2 years ago when he'd come to leave, and I wondered if he'd chosen it deliberately, if he understood the geometry of what he was doing. "My father left when I was 3, he said. I hadn't known that. In a year together I hadn't known that. He left because my mother was pregnant with my sister. He didn't want children, or he didn't want more than one, or he didn't want to be responsible for a family. Or, he paused. I've never fully understood the reason. He just left. And my mother raised me and my sister alone, and he stopped again. She was extraordinary at it. But I saw what it cost her. I saw what it takes to hold everything alone, so you decided to do the same thing to me, I said. Because your father did it to your mother, he flinched. Not consciously, Sean, I know how it sounds like you had a fear that you turned into something you inflicted on someone else instead of dealing with it, yes. The word was quiet. Scraped. Yes. That is what I did. Silence. When did you figure that out? I asked, slowly. Over the first 6 months after I left. I thought I was protecting you, somehow. Some version of myself that believed that leaving was a kindness, that you were better without someone who might be his father. He looked at his hands. It took a long time to understand that I wasn't protecting anyone. I was just afraid. What changed? I started talking to someone. A therapist. He looked up. I should have done it years ago. I think I probably knew that and refused to, for reasons that also trace back to fear. The edge of something that wasn't quite a smile. I'm working on it, good. I held his gaze. That's good. For you. But I need you to understand something. Tell me, I rebuilt myself after you left. I built a life. Not in spite of what happened but through it and around it, and I am not willing to have that destabilized. I am not available to be someone you return to when you figured things out, as though 2 years of being absent is a break that we come back from. It doesn't work that way. I know, you keep saying you know, because I do. Then tell me what you actually want. Not what you're sorry for, not what you understand. What you want. He looked at me for a long moment. I want to know my sons, he said. I want to know Oliver and Eli. I want the chance to, not to replace what I lost. I know that's not possible, I know I cannot. He stopped. Collected himself. I want to be in their lives. Whatever that looks like. Whatever terms you set. I'm not here to make demands, the question sat between us. I love you, he said quietly. I have loved you since that Tuesday at Milo's and I never stopped. I don't say that because I expect it to change anything. I say it because you asked what I want, and that is part of the honest answer. But what I want and what I expect are different things, and I'm not here to ask you for what I want. I'm here to ask if there's a version of the future where I can do better. I looked at him. This person I had loved completely, who had broken something in me by leaving, who had cost me the specific loneliness of being alone in the moments that should have been shared. I looked at him and I felt the 18 things again, and underneath all of them I felt the thing that had always been there, the thing I had never fully been able to extinguish, which made me deeply irritated with myself, and also, underneath the irritation, something that might have been hope. Go home, I said. Come back Thursday. The boys wake up at 7 and they eat breakfast at 7:30. If you're going to know them, start at the beginning. His breath caught. I watched it happen. Thursday, he said, don't be late. I won't. He stood. He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the door frame and looked back at me, and I could see him working out whether to say something else. Doing the structural calculation of it, which was the most Sean Casey thing I had ever witnessed. Thank you, he said finally. Just that, I nodded. I held everything steady until the door closed, then I sat back against the couch and put my face in my hands and breathed. I barely slept Wednesday night. This is not something I want to admit, but honesty is the only currency this story has, so, I lay awake for most of the night in the particular way of someone whose mind will not stop running its calculations. What I was doing. What it meant. What I was opening, and whether it could be safely opened. Whether the version of Sean who had sat in my chair and spoken about his father and his fear and 2 years of slow understanding was the same person who had stood in my doorway 2 years ago and not quite met my eyes on his way out. People can change. I believe that. I am a person who writes about people changing, and I believe in it as a structural possibility of human beings. But belief and willingness are different things. And willingness and wisdom are different things still, and somewhere in the tangled hierarchy of those three things lay whatever I was doing by letting Thursday happen. At 6:45 I heard Eli first. He always woke first, as though he had somewhere to be and resented the time lost to sleep. Then Oliver, slower to surface, needing a moment. I went to them. I changed them and brought them out to the living room, and they ate breakfast with the focused intensity that toddlers apply to food they've decided to accept. The doorbell rang at exactly 7:30. I opened it. He had a paper bag and two small stuffed animals. A bear and a rabbit. He held them with the slightly uncertain air of someone who has prepared carefully for a situation they cannot fully predict and is now in the thick of it. "Come in," I said. He came in. Oliver and Eli were in the living room, still at the low table with the remains of breakfast. They looked up when Sean came in. Oliver first, because Oliver looked at everything, those evaluating eyes doing their work. Then Eli, who was never one to let anyone else get the first look at something new. Sean stopped. He looked at them. I watched his face in the moment he saw them clearly, not as an idea or a fact or a consequence of a decision, but as two actual small people eating cereal and looking back at him with his own eyes. Whatever wall he maintained against feeling things, it did not hold. I saw it happen, the specific loosening of a person whose defenses have encountered something they weren't built for. His face did something complex and unguarded, and he stood very still, like a person who has walked into a room that is far more important than any room they've been in before and is trying to behave accordingly. "Hi," he said softly. Eli regarded him with the frank assessment of a person who has opinions about strangers. Then he held up a piece of cereal in offering, which is the highest honor a toddler can bestow. Oliver slid off his chair. He walked across the room to Sean with a direct, purposeful movement that was entirely his own, stopped in front of him, and looked up. Sean crouched down. "Eye level." "Hi," Oliver said. He had 12 reliable words at this point and used them with considerable strategic precision. "Hi," Sean said again. His voice was doing something complicated. "I'm Sean." Oliver considered this. Then he pointed at the paper bag. Sean let out a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something less composed. He opened the bag. He produced the bear. He held it out. Oliver took it. Examined it with the seriousness of an archaeologist with a significant find. Then he held it against his chest and walked back to the table. Eli had climbed down during this. He was already next to Sean, examining him without the pretense of subtlety. Sean produced the rabbit. Eli grabbed it, laughed at it, grabbed Sean's sleeve to show him something across the room that apparently also required comment. I leaned against the kitchen doorway and watched Sean Casey, who had been afraid, who had left, who had spent 2 years becoming someone who could come back, be dragged by my small fierce son to examine a toy train on the other side of the room. I felt something shift. Carefully. The way things shift when you're not quite ready to let them, but you've run out of reasons to hold them still. He came every week. Thursday mornings, without fail, and slowly extended to include Sunday afternoons when I offered them, which I did incrementally, watching to see whether the pattern would hold. It held. He was not immediately natural with them. That first month had a visible learning curve. The particular awkwardness of someone inserting themselves into an established system, learning the specific ecosystem of Oliver and Eli. He got things wrong. He offered food they didn't like. He misread Eli's tired signals as hungry ones. He was overly careful in a way that read to Oliver, who was perceptive about these things, as uncertainty, and Oliver responded to uncertainty by withdrawing, which made Sean more uncertain, a feedback loop that took several weeks to break, but he kept coming. And he paid attention. And slowly the learning curve flattened out and something else replaced the awkwardness, something quieter and more real. He started to understand Eli's frequency. That particular pitch and pace. He started to understand that Oliver needed time and consistency before he extended himself, and that patience was not passivity, it was presence, and that presence was what Oliver was waiting for. I watched it from a careful distance. I was not easy with him. I was not cold, but I was deliberate. I had walls that I had built for good reasons and I did not take them down, but I also did not add to them, and maybe that was its own kind of opening. We talked. Parallel to the visits, separate from them, in the evenings after the boys were asleep. Sometimes on my couch, sometimes on the back steps of my building where there was a small sad garden that I'd been improving and which was still mostly ambitious than successful. We talked about what had happened. Not repeatedly, not as a ritual of reproach, but as two people genuinely trying to understand how they had arrived at this particular point. He told me about his father. The full version, not the compressed one from that first evening. The way absence had shaped him in ways he hadn't understood until someone external had helped him map the terrain. The particular architecture of his fear, how it had been built from the belief, somewhere deep and irrational, that he was his father's son in the worst possible way, that whatever it was that made a man unable to stay was something he had inherited, and that by removing himself he was preventing the worst possible version of the story. The worst version of the story, I told him, is the one where you leave. I know that now, you knew it then too. Part of you did, yes, he said. And I chose the fear anyway. What made you choose differently? He was quiet for a moment. We were on the back steps, November settling around us, our breath making small clouds. He was looking at the sorry little garden and I was looking at the side of his face. I saw a photograph, he said finally. About 18 months after I left. Your author page on your publisher's website. They'd updated the photo. And you were holding Oliver and Eli, about 6 months old, and they had, he stopped. They had my eyes. And I looked at that photograph for about 3 hours. And then I called my therapist and said I think I need to talk about some things. I thought about that. The photograph. The 3 hours, it took another 6 months before I was ready to come, he said. Before I thought I had any right to. You didn't have a right, I said. Not automatically. Coming here wasn't about rights. It was about whether I decided to give you a chance. I know, but I'm glad you came. The words were out before I'd fully decided to say them. He turned to look at me. In the cold November dark his expression was very careful and very open at the same time. Arthur, don't, I said. Not yet. I'm not. I searched for the words. I need more time. But I wanted to say it. That I'm glad you came. That Oliver getting dragged you across the room to show you the train is. I stopped. Breathed. It's something good. It's a good thing. And you made it possible by coming back, he nodded. He looked back at the garden. The lavender isn't going to survive the winter, he said. I know. I'm going to replace it with something more sensible. I could help with that. If you wanted, maybe, I said. Maybe. Winter came and Oliver and Eli had opinions about snow, which they expressed voluminously and required demonstration of at every available opportunity. Sean built a snow structure in the small park near the apartment that was technically a snowman but had been modified by Eli's input into something more experimental. Abstract, with the additional branch arms and pinecone details that gave it a particular personality. Oliver named it Gus, which he considered fully settled, and visited it daily until it melted. Spring came. The garden on the back steps improved. Sean had, as it turned out, a practical knowledge of plants that extended from his general interest in how structures worked in the world, and he replaced the lavender with something hardier and spent 2 Sundays in late April helping me address the soil situation while the boys supervised from a blanket with the serious air of project managers. Summer came. The boys turned 3 in October, a smaller party than the year before, still chaotic but differently so. A chaos I was no longer managing alone. It happened gradually, the thawing. Not dramatically. Not with a declared moment of resolution. It was the accumulation of a year of Thursdays and Sundays and evening conversations and small ordinary moments, the particular texture of Sean knowing how to make Oliver laugh, structural observations, delivered seriously, which Oliver found hilarious for reasons unique to Oliver, knowing to have the specific brand of juice box Eli preferred. Knowing when I'd had a bad writing day before I said anything about it and arriving with takeaway from the Vietnamese place I liked, it was the night. In July when Eli had a fever and we both didn't sleep and sat on the floor of the boys' room taking turns and Sean read to them at 2 in the morning. Both boys half asleep against him, his voice doing its low quiet thing, and I sat against the wall watching and felt something that had been carefully held in reserve quietly step forward. It was the Thursday in August when Oliver climbed into Sean's lap unprompted and fell asleep there, and Sean sat completely still for 45 minutes so as not to wake him, Catching my eye over Oliver's head with an expression of pure overwhelmed wonder, it was the evening. Sean said, quietly and without preamble, I want to tell you something and I don't want you to feel any pressure about it. We were on the couch. The boys were asleep. The apartment was in its evening quiet. Tell me. I said, I have loved you this entire time. Through the leaving and the coming back and the last year of being rebuilt into someone you might actually want. And I'm not telling you that because I expect it to change anything right now. I know where we are and I respect where we are. He paused. I got very good at not saying the things that mattered. I'm practicing saying them. Even when they're uncomfortable. I looked at him. This careful, complicated, formerly afraid person who had shown up every Thursday for a year and built something real out of the ruins of his absence. I know, I said, that's my line, I know. I'm taking it. The corner of his mouth moved. I love you too, I said. We're not going back to what we were. I don't think we can do that and I don't think we should try. But something is different from what it was 6 months ago. Something is, I searched for the word. Closer. We're closer. And I don't want to be afraid of that, I don't either, so we go slowly as you need, slower than that, probably, okay, and you don't hide things when you're afraid. If something is happening inside you that might affect this, you tell me. We don't repeat the patterns, I know. He paused. Caught himself. Yes. I will. I am actively learning to say it out loud instead of disappearing into yourself. Yes, good. I leaned my head back against the couch. Stay for dinner. I was going to offer to cook. Can you cook? I've been learning. That could be a disaster, probably. But the kind I'd like to try. I smiled. It happened before I could assess it. His expression shifted in response, that reluctant warming that had undone me in a coffee shop 3.5 years ago, and I thought, there it is. That's still there, fine, I said. But I reserve the right to order takeaway as backup. Reasonable, he said, and he went to my kitchen and made an attempt at pasta that was, in fact, not a disaster, which I told him at the table while he watched me eat it with visible concern. It's good, I said, you're just saying that, Sean. The pasta is good. Oliver had knocked his fork on the floor and was watching this exchange with great interest. He picked up a new fork, pointed it at Sean, and said, good. Eli laughed at this and clapped, because Eli applauded things that pleased him on an instinctual basis. I looked at my sons and at Sean and at the disaster of a dinner table with the fallen fork and the juice box that was definitely going to tip over in approximately 30 seconds, and I felt the shape of something assembling itself around me, not the same as before, better than before, more honest and more hard-won and more worth protecting. Oliver and Eli turned 4 in October. The party involved Sean. Fully, officially, in the way that didn't require explanation or careful staging. He was there from the beginning, blowing up balloons with Eli, who was convinced he could do it himself and was receiving encouraging commentary on his attempts. He was there making the cake, which had become his specific contribution to birthdays and which had evolved considerably from that first, uncertain attempt on my birthday years ago. It was a chocolate cake with green frosting because Eli had decided green was the correct color and there was no discussing it. He was there when Oliver fell and scraped his knee and wanted specifically and immediately a bandage applied by Sean, which he accepted with a gravity that suggested the wound was significant, and Sean administered the bandage with the attentiveness that Oliver required without making a fuss of the whole thing. He was there at the end, when the guests were gone and the apartment had been partially restored to order and both boys were asleep, worn out by the particular intensity of being 4 and having a birthday. He was there helping me with the final round of dishes, the low comfortable quiet of two people who have learned the shape of each other's silences. I need to ask you something, he said, without looking up from the dish he was drying. Ask. I've been looking at apartments. I turned. He was looking at me now, not. He set the dish down. Not with any assumption. Not with a plan I'm presenting as settled. Just, I've been looking. There's 2 streets from here. Ground floor, garden access. Big enough. He held my gaze. I want to be close. I want to be the person who is there for the flu and the bad dreams and the ordinary Tuesday mornings. I want to know if that's something we're moving toward, 2 streets, I said, 2 streets, I thought about it. The logistics of it. The emotional reality of it. What it would mean for Oliver and Eli to have him 2 streets away, not a scheduled visit, accessible. What it would mean for me, you could come for breakfast. I said finally. He blinked. What, if you're 2 streets away? You could come for breakfast. Not every morning. But, I paused. The boys do better on mornings you're here. And I stopped. Let it be what it was. I do better on mornings you're here. Something opened in his face. Quietly. Deeply, Arthur, look at the apartment, I said. Tell me what it's like. He signed the lease on a Thursday. Of course he did. He was 2 streets away and he came for breakfast 3 mornings a week and on Sundays and on the evenings when the boys asked for him, which became most evenings, so that the question of what exactly we were sorted itself out less through declaration than through the simple accumulation of being present in each other's lives as though presence was the most natural thing. We did not rush. We had built something too careful and too important to rush. We had the particular patience of people who have survived the worst versions of their own fear and chosen differently and know exactly what that cost, but he held my hand on a walk in February and I let him, and the following Thursday morning when he came for breakfast he kissed me in the kitchen before the boys were up and I kissed him back, and that was, by any reasonable accounting, the beginning, not the same beginning. The first beginning had been beautiful and unguarded and had assumed a future that it wasn't ready to actually build. This beginning was slower and more deliberate and carried all the weight of everything that had happened. The leaving and the returning and the year of careful reconstruction, and it was, for all that weight, the most solid beginning I had ever experienced. It was like the difference between a structure that looks finished and a structure that is finished. Between something that stands and something that holds. Oliver is 5 now and has recently developed a consuming interest in how bridges work, which Sean has been addressing with a degree of thoroughness and enthusiasm that suggests this is the best thing that has ever happened to him. They spend Saturday mornings looking at photographs of notable bridges and Sean explains the structural principles and Oliver asks questions that are, by any measure, more sophisticated than they should be at 5, and Sean answers them with complete seriousness as though this is a conversation between colleagues. Eli is 5 and has recently decided to be a musician, an ambition he pursues by banging on every surface available to him with whatever he can find, which has led to the negotiated introduction of an actual drum pad, which is at least controlled and bounded. He also sings. He has, genuinely, a very good ear, and he will sing anything if you ask him, including improvised songs about whatever is happening around him, which has become a form of ongoing family commentary that I am considering turning into a book. I am writing the book. Actually. Not about Eli's singing specifically but about this, some version of this, the shape of how we got here and what we built from what broke. My editor says it's the most personal thing I've ever written. She's right. It's also, I think, the best. Sean lives 2 streets away and is here most days and has been the structural engineer of our particular life in the most literal and metaphorical sense possible. He builds things that hold. He understands load-bearing points. He knows that what matters about a structure is not how it looks from the outside but whether it can carry what it needs to carry over time. He asked me, on a Tuesday in March, in Milo's, at the same back corner table where I had first seen him. He had planned it. I had suspected something was being planned but not the full shape of it, not the fact that he had taken me back to the actual beginning, which was, I said afterward, excessive in terms of sentimentality, which made him laugh in the way I had been cataloging since the first time. He said, I left once and I will not leave again. Not because I'm asking you to trust that without evidence, but because I've spent 2 years building the evidence and I intend to spend the rest of my life not giving you any reason to doubt it. I love you. I love Oliver and Eli. I want to build something that holds. Will you let me? I said yes. I have been saying yes, in various forms, for 2 years. The official version just had a ring attached to it. Oliver, when we told him, examined the ring with the evaluative attention he gives everything and asked whether Sean's apartment would have different furniture now or the same furniture. We told him we hadn't decided yet. He considered this, nodded, and returned to the bridge photograph he'd been examining. Eli sang a song about it. It was, objectively, excellent. I have it recorded. This is the thing about love that I know now, that I didn't know at 23 in the back of a coffee shop watching a man with storm cloud eyes stare at a folder. It is not a fixed point. It is not a perfect moment on a bridge in autumn that can be frozen and preserved as the thing itself. It is structural. It is weight-bearing. It is the material you build with and the decisions you make and the willingness, over and over, to stay in the room and say the thing and not let the fear run faster than the love. It is every Thursday morning. Every ordinary breakfast. Every scraped knee and birthday cake and late night on the couch and conversation on the back steps in the cold. It is showing up, that is all. That is everything. Sean Casey learned, eventually, to show up, and I learned, eventually, to let him. If you made it to the end, you're my kind of person. Subscribe. Drop a comment, and I'll see you in the next story.